January 20th, 2019. Welcoming Grace with White Stone Ceremony. Neil Worthington. Licensed Unity teacher and spiritual leader at Unity of Payson, Arizona.
Divine, or God. And you may have another term that works for you. There is that upward pull, that important have to expand, have to evolve, have to move upward. And that is the very nature of the divine and of us as expressions of the divine. That is the truth. Today we consider the idea of welcoming grace. The English language isn't always clear, so when you look at these two words together, you can take it one of two ways. You can take it that grace is doing the welcoming. Welcoming grace. There's a welcoming grace for us. Or you can take it that I'm doing the welcoming. I welcome grace. I welcome that upward pull of the universe. Or that upward pull of the universe is beckoning to me. One of two ways, and we're going to consider those just a little bit today. Let's do it this way. Let's imagine that we're in a small town. Oh, we are in a small town. But let's imagine that it's small enough that pretty much within the town you can walk to another part of the town. And your house is in that town, and Grace's house is in that town. And so, you know your house and you're very familiar with it, but there's also this Grace house that again just looks so appealing, maybe not because it's so beautiful or the landscaping is so great, but just it seems to beckon to you, seems to call to you. So let's talk about Grace house. In order to go to Grace house, a couple of things have to happen. You have to get out of your own house first. Now, I don't know if you're like me, but sometimes I'm just really reluctant, maybe in fact resistant, to the idea of leaving my stuff, leaving the comfort that I have, leaving my sometimes self-pity, sometimes just willingness to be stuck, and to go to Grace house. To go to where I know that upward pull of the universe is calling to me. Or sometimes, and I'm sure this is not true of any of you, I set out for Grace house and I get sidetracked. I find some way to postpone my arrival. But I'm sure that that's not true of you. Also, Grace house, as beckoning as it is, as energetically drawing as it is, may look pretty much like any other house in town. May even look not too aesthetically appealing. May sometimes look like, I'm not sure I want to go there. But Grace house is there continually doing this. Being the divine and attracting you as the expression of the divine. It's like there's an affinity that Grace house is trying to match up. When we get there, we go through the door, we are swept upward. It's almost like walking through that door, we're just swept upward because that's the very nature of grace. The house, it's endless. The food, more than our potluck, is just all over. The supply of whatever I need, and I like the way you put desires. The desires that we have are from the divine that is within us, and those desires are eminently not only available but assured. And we are always welcome. That's Grace house. There's a story that I liked when I was younger. And I'm sure many of you have heard a story written by C.S. Lewis called The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, part of the Chronicles of Narnia. Anybody who's familiar with that? Well, almost everybody. So I'll just hit the highlights of the story. You remember Lucy and Edmund, Peter and Susan, the 4 children. Did you remember that they were in war situations and they had been taken to the country to an uncle's house to be safe? So it was a kind of a tough situation for them. And those 4 children, first starting with Susan, found a wardrobe in a closet or a back room. And the doors to that wardrobe led to an entirely different reality. Susan went through and came back and couldn't believe it, and none of the rest of them believed her. Susan and Edmund went back, and Edmund got into a little bit of trouble, if you remember. And eventually all 4 of the children went. And not only did they experience a new reality, they experienced the company and the protection of Aslan the lion. Remember Aslan? So grace is that kind of a door through which when we go, we are drawn into an entirely new reality, one that may be more real than the one we're living. Interesting fact about that story was that when the children came back, every time it was as though no time at all had passed. This is a timeless, totally fulfilling, new experience. And that's where we are at this point of the year. New experience. And we'll celebrate that as we go on. So, onto your house. It may be more of a mansion than that, or it may be very humble, but it's your house. And if you're going to welcome Grace, first thing you have to do is send out an invitation. Now, maybe not a written invitation like a birthday party invitation, but in fact an intention that upward pull of the universe is welcome in my house, is welcome in my experience. Then, as we celebrated at the end of last year, you have to clean out the junk. I mean, if you're going to have grace, be welcome. You have to clean out the junk. There are things you need to let go of. And as you let go of those things, you make the house ready for grace. Then, of course, as with all guests, you honor grace when grace comes. You honor them by giving the best, paying attention the most. You honor that guest. And finally, you find that when you honor that guest's grace, that upward pull of the universe that's now in your very house, you and your house are transformed. That's what we're about. As a spiritual community, as a human community, being transformed and ever, ever raising. So I made a new definition for grace here, a short one. Grace is favor given to you and me as expressions of the divine. We often talk about being expressions of the divine. Well, grace is that undergirding, powerful, all-knowing sense and energy that draws us upward and grants us favor. Now, the favors are immense. As we talked about when we were in Grace House, the supply is endless. The favor is always there. There is something underlying all of our life that is ready to give us at any moment. We're the ones that are reluctant to receive often. Grace also is a constant counsel. When we need counsel, grace is there to provide that. When we don't know which way to go, grace is there to point a direction. Grace is always also continual comfort. And I imagine you, if you're like me, sometimes need that continual comfort. So, as we consider grace today, that upward pull of the universe just wanting to woo us and take us along so that our rise may be even greater than we could have imagined it for ourselves. Grace is welcoming to us, more than welcoming. And we, if we would rise, welcome grace. So, welcoming grace. Grace welcomes us. We welcome grace. One of the aspects of grace is that we always have the opportunity to take a new look at life. And we'd like to move into a time when we're going to celebrate that with our White Stone ceremony. White Stone ceremony is something that comes from a couple of traditions, one a Roman tradition and one a biblical tradition. But when we look at these, as with many other things in unity, we look at beyond the immediate, beyond the literal, beyond the usual meaning. We look for one that's beyond, that really resonates with who we are deep inside. So we're going to look at the white stone as in a metaphysical sense. Just reviewing that Roman sense. The Romans, beginning even at the time of Jesus, would often use white stone as a bit of a currency, a ticket to a very special invitation, an honor to a friend, or even a declaration of innocence in a court of law. This white stone was a powerful, powerful tool that, when used, could make one's life richer. Going to the point that we see that white stone in the Christian scripture, it's in Revelation 2. Don't know if you remember, the writer wrote to 7 different churches. One of the churches was one called Pergamum, which is now in modern-day Turkey. And in that letter to Pergamum, here's what the writer John said. To him that overcomes, I will give some of the hidden manna to eat. And I will give him a white stone, and on the stone a new name written, which no one knows except him who receives it. Now, you notice that manna. Somebody tell me, where did manna show up?
Desert.
In the desert, in the wilderness. Do you remember the Hebrews who had left Egypt, the Exodus? They were out of Egypt, but for 40 years they wandered in the wilderness. And they were often hungry, thirsty. And the provision of the divine for them was manna. White little loaves or little cakes that could be used for enriching and nourishing food. So that's where we get the manna reference. And then we move on to this reference. Actually, Jesus used that whole reference of manna, and we call it the bread of life. He used that as well when he referenced manna and said, I am the bread of life. So we began to sense a new look at things, a new look of the Christ within Jesus, the Christ, but pointing toward the Christ within us, and a Christ consciousness that for us can raise us up. And then we look at the scripture in Revelations, the one I just read, and there we find that phrase, the white stone. And in that case, the white stone was a new name, or a new start, a new look at things, a new perspective. And so as we are in this white stone ceremony today, we're going to be looking at it with fresh eyes. We're going to be looking at it newly. Here we have the year of 2019 directly ahead of us, and we have an opportunity to look at that in a new way, if we will. We have an opportunity, if you will, to tie back to grace, to receive, to welcome grace, even to seek it. So I'd like us to move now to that time of our white stone ceremony. And before we do, we're going to go into a little bit of a meditation. So I'd like you to get quiet with me and just comfortable in your seat. So in the stillness is where we know. Not in the frenetic back and forth of our mind, but in the stillness. And we know from a different level. We know from a different place. We know from something that is undeniably true within us. So as we breathe in and breathe out easily and notice our breath, let us wipe the slate of our mind clean for a moment. Focus only on that breath and the sacred stillness that descends on us, comes from within us. Rest for a moment in that silence. And as you rest, open your heart to a new knowing. As you are in that stillness, open yourself to a word or a name, just a single word or a single name that comes to you, not through the process of thinking, but just boom, it's there. So wait in the silence and hear that word for you today and for this time ahead. Have you heard something? Has something come to you from that intuitive core of your being? Treasure it. If it's still in the process, be patient with it. Let us bring our attention back to this place as we proceed with this ceremony. This is sacred space. This is sacred time. I'd like to ask Betty and Mary Ann to come, and Chris as well, if you can come this way. Betty and Mary Ann, as prayer chaplains, are going to hold this sacred space for us. And Chris will be the keeper of the white stones. The white stones we'll be using today come from the Tonto National Forest. They are rough. They have a lot of texture and different colors. stone for you is in that collection. So I'd like you to do this. As you're ready, as you have that word for yourself, that new name perhaps, just quietly come forward. Choose that stone that's calling to you. And then there are markers here on this stand. Take that marker, write that name down. Now you may not have that word yet. It may take you a week to get it. So you can get the stone anyway. Write it down when you get it. But I want you to honor the truth that's coming from within you. And in your own timing, just come to the front. Ask Chris to step forward just a little bit so we make a little more movement at the table. And then come on up and take one of those markers and write that word that you have on the stone, on your stone. You're going to keep this. It's going to be in your consciousness. Do this as you're ready. And when you're done, there's a white envelope on the edge of the front pew. Take that back with you. There's pens on both sides so we can. It's going to be a good year for you. Those desires of your heart are waiting to be filled. No one else has to be able to read this. It's just for you. No one else has to know it. When you've carried that envelope back with you to your seat, feel free to look at it. This is an extension of the white stone ceremony. A letter to the divine from you. I've given you a couple of starters on that. You can fill that out at your leisure. We have a basket at the back and we'll collect those letters when you're ready. You're going to put your name and your address on the outside. We're going to mail that to you in about 6 months. You're going to see what you affirmed today. is the honor. It's almost like the honor that you are giving grace as you welcome. Honor this stone because it's come from within you. It's a divine voice that's spoken for you and only you. So take that with you. I've heard a couple of people say, oh yeah, I've got a collection of these. And then that letter that you have, write that at your leisure. For the next couple of weeks, we'll have a basket here to collect them. Remember to put your name and address on the outside. Give it the consideration that you need to. And so as we conclude this ceremony, we are grateful that we get a new start. We are grateful that the divine is always new and fresh within us as we're open to receive it.